I never thought I'd be here writing about what happened to me 2 years ago with my wayward wife. It sounds like one of those TV shows that only happens to other people, you know? But maybe it happens more often than we think, and people just don't talk about it. I was too ashamed to tell anyone about the fallout at the time, but she left me with no choice. I had to expose her on Facebook. Let me give you some context to my story. We met at a park where I was working a part-time gig walking people's dogs for money. I'll never forget that day we met. As our paths crossed, our eyes met. She was jogging and I was walking a dog. I greeted her and she stopped, taking off her headphones. I didn't want to seem awkward, so I complimented her on how cute she looked. She thanked me, and we started chatting. She mentioned that she was trying to lose weight, and I reassured her that she looked great. She blushed and couldn't stop smiling. As our conversation continued, we talked about the dog I was walking, a friendly golden retriever. She then shared that she had recently lost her beloved Pomeranian and wished to get a larger dog breed, such as a golden retriever, so she could take it out for a walk or run. She mentioned that she had just started running recently and seemed a bit insecure about her weight. Although to me she looked stunning with her nice long hair and big chest, just my type. At the time, she was 24 and I was 26. Our conversation lasted about 30 minutes, and as we parted ways, I walked her to her car, we exchanged numbers, and made plans to meet again the following day. Allow me to share a bit about my background, as I believe it is relevant to my story. I moved to the United States from El Salvador when I was 19 years old. While my English may not be perfect, I speak and write fluently, thanks to my mother who was an English teacher back in El Salvador. On the other hand, she was born here in the U.S., but her parents are from Mexico. She has beautiful black hair, tan skin, and a typical attractive Mexican look, similar to that of Galamontes. As for me, I resemble the soccer player Rodolfo Zelaya. The following week, we met up at a bar and got to know each other more. During our conversation, she revealed that she had recently ended a relationship and wanted to take things slow. I honored her decision and waited patiently because I was head over heels in love. But after 2 months of dating, all I got was a peck on the lips, and she refused to be intimate with me. My patience was wearing thin, and when I asked her why she said she needed a commitment, I offered to make things official and asked her to be my girlfriend, but she said that wasn't enough for her because she wasn't getting any younger. It's been 3 months since we started dating, and things were getting serious between us. We've started having closeness, but she kept pressuring me for something more. I wanted to marry her too, but I needed to get my finances straight first. You see, my job as a construction worker was tough with long hours, and I had to support my parents and siblings in El Salvador. I came to this country illegally, but I spent 6 years working on my immigration status. Now I was trying to settle down, but I didn't have enough money to afford the expensive wedding and engagement rings that she wanted. Looking back, I should have seen the red flag waving high above her head. She always had this air of superiority, like she was better than me because she was born in the U.S., had a fancy college degree, and ran with the elite crowd. She never said it outright, but I could feel the condescension in her tone, as if she believed she was above my station in life. I should have picked up on this earlier, but I was too blinded by love and her stunning looks. It's not like I needed her to secure my immigration status since I already had my green card. In my mind, I thought that marrying an American girl would elevate my status among my peers. My English wasn't the best at the time, and hers was perfect, so I saw it as a chance to practice with a native speaker. I also wanted to experience the American lifestyle, which can only be fully experienced by immersing oneself in American culture. Mentally, I saw my girlfriend as above me and put her on a pedestal, essentially demoting myself, which was a huge mistake. After working long hours, sometimes up to 16 hours a day, I saved up enough money to buy an engagement ring that cost $4,000. She dropped hints about her expectations, and I knew anything less wouldn't be good enough for her. I took my girlfriend to a fancy restaurant, even though I could hardly afford it, and popped the question. She was ecstatic, happier than I had ever seen her before. It was a beautiful moment. But as I watched her admire the expensive engagement ring I had bought her, I couldn't help but wonder how much the material object meant to her. I know some people see the ring as a symbol of love and commitment, but it felt like my fiancé was obsessing over it, like Gollum with the ring in Lord of the Rings. I started to feel like our relationship was based on the ring and other material things, rather than true love and commitment. Looking back, I should have realized this then, but my infatuation with her beauty and the illusion of love blinded me. I'd been seeing this woman for 4 months, and we were already engaged to be married. Until that point, she had never invited me to meet her parents or attend any family events with her. But after I proposed, she finally invited me to meet her family the following weekend. Her parents were a down-to-earth traditional Mexican couple who were devout Catholics. She had 1 brother and 2 sisters, and she was the youngest daughter. All of her siblings had gone to college, and they spoke English with each other, but spoke Spanish with their parents. As I sat there, observing them, I couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia because I hadn't experienced that kind of family love and togetherness in so long. The night was pleasant. Her parents seemed to really like me, but her siblings were distant and dismissive. I couldn't shake the feeling that they saw me as beneath them, but I reasoned that it was probably because they were born and raised in America. However, during the meeting, I couldn't help but notice that my fiancé kept showing off the ring, like he was the real star of the show, and I was just an afterthought. It made me feel foolish standing there with a goofy grin on my face, like I was just the guy who donated the ring. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and seeing her gazing at the ring, and in that moment, it should have been clear to me that something was wrong. But at the time, I was blinded by the happiness of seeing her so delighted with my gift. She always praised my taste, and I was pleased that I could provide her with something she valued so highly. Our bed life was pathetic, to say the least. If I was lucky, we would be close maybe twice a week, but I always had to beg her for it. It was as if she was doing me a favor, and I found myself begging for affection, like a pathetic supplicant. I was always trying to impress her, to gain her favor, and it became a daily routine to do all the household chores after my grueling 13, 16-hour work shifts. What was strange was that the more she rejected my efforts, the harder I tried to please her. Looking back, I can see how I had become a complete doormat. 3 weeks had passed, and I had just returned from work when she dropped the bomb on me. She was pregnant. She explained that her body had been behaving oddly, and she had missed her period. So she took a pregnancy test, which confirmed her suspicions. Initially, I was ecstatic, overjoyed beyond belief. I couldn't wait to tell my family back home in El Salvador. I called my parents and siblings to share the good news and informed them that we would visit them when the baby was born. But my fiancée wasn't as thrilled as I was. She was worried because we weren't married yet, and it had always been her dream to be married before having children. She guilt-tripped me, saying that it would be humiliating for her to be pregnant and unmarried, and that her friends and family would look down on her. I promised her that I would bust my hump at work so that we could have a spectacular wedding. She was eager to tie the knot ASAP, worried that her growing belly would make her bridal gown look less than perfect. We compromised and decided on a scaled-down wedding to save on costs, agreeing that it would take place in 2 months. After that, I was working like a dog, putting in 16-hour days to make up the financial difference. My fiancée was salaried, so she couldn't contribute more than what she was already earning. But I didn't mind the grind, as long as we could make our special day a dream come true. However, little did I know that this wedding was just the beginning of the nightmare that awaited me. I was barely able to get any sleep, but the prospect of becoming a father soon gave me a sense of assurance and happiness. I thought life couldn't have been any better than it was at that moment. However, things started to go awry in our relationship as my wife stopped performing any household chores. I ended up doing everything, cooking, cleaning, and working 16-hour shifts. I even prepared her lunch for work, but she always insisted on having 2 lunches because she claimed to bring one for a coworker. I couldn't understand why nobody ever brought her lunch in return, but she said that my cooking was the best, and she'd rather have my lunch than anyone else's. It didn't make much sense to me, but I brushed it off as a minor issue. The next week, my wife invited me to her work event on a Friday evening, which was a gathering at a bar. She's a marketing coordinator at an advertising company. I had to leave work early to make it there by 5 p.m. She was very particular about my outfit and even picked it out for me, which I thought was just her being thoughtful. But looking back, it seemed like she wanted me to impress her snobbish colleagues. It should have been a warning sign, but I didn't realize it at the time. As we arrived at the bar around 5:30 p.m., I couldn't help but notice the stuffy atmosphere. My fiancée had invited me to a work gathering with her colleagues. She works as a marketing coordinator at an advertising company. She introduced me to the 23 people present, some of whom brought their spouses as well, although she only works directly with about 5 of them. They all seemed so uptight. I felt out of place there, being just a simple construction worker, while they all appeared to work in fancy air-conditioned offices with college degrees. The attention was on my fiancé's engagement ring, which every girl there seemed interested in. To my surprise, they all thought that I owned a construction company, but I wondered who had given them that impression. I felt like a fish out of water, struggling to keep up with the pretentious atmosphere. But I noticed something peculiar among the guests. Everyone was putting on a facade, trying too hard to appear sophisticated. After my fiancé left to socialize, I found myself alone at the bar. That's when a young man approached me, probably around 22 years old. We had already exchanged pleasantries during the introductions, but this time he took a keen interest in my accent. He asked if I was from El Salvador, and I confirmed his suspicions. He then revealed that his parents were from there too, and we both laughed about the quirks of Salvadoran culture. It was a relief to have someone to talk to and be myself around in a sea of phonies. As we chatted, the young man mentioned that his parents were from the same area in El Salvador as I was, and I realized that I actually knew his family. In fact, I knew some of his extended family members more than he did. He told me that his uncle recently passed in a gang-related incident, and I'd also heard about it from people back home. He mentioned that he wanted to travel to El Salvador for the funeral. As we talked, it felt like we were two long-lost amigos finally catching up. After an hour, we somehow landed on the topic of my soon-to-be wife and his work. He asked when I planned to tie the knot, and I mentioned in about 2 months. Then he asked how long I'd been with my fiancée, and I told him almost 5 months. Suddenly, his demeanor shifted, and he looked worried. He paused for a moment, and then said he needed to tell me something, but I couldn't let her know it was from him. He emphasized that he was only telling me because we were like brothers. As we talked, I felt a bond growing between us, like we were long-lost brothers. Our conversation shifted towards my wife and his work. He asked me when I was getting married, and I mentioned the plan to do it in 2 months. When he learned I had only known my fiancée for almost 5 months, he seemed to be worried. After a moment of silence, he revealed something that shook me to the core. He said he had something to tell me about my wife, but he didn't want her to know that he had told me. He justified it by saying that I was like a brother to him. He motioned for me to look over at a group of guys, telling me he worked with them and had a gut feeling that the blonde dude was hooking up with my fiancée. I was taken aback, feeling a mix of shock and embarrassment, but I tried to keep my cool, even though I felt like a phony playing the tough guy from El Salvador in my fancy blue blazer. This guy I barely knew was dropping a bombshell on me that his coworker was sleeping with my future wife. Despite the gravity of the situation, I managed to stay composed and just listened intently. With a concerned look on his face, he whispered to me that my wife has been frequently visiting his department without any valid reason. When I asked him how long this has been going on, he hesitantly replied that it has been going on for about a year, but he was unsure of the exact duration. He went on to explain that the guy she was spending time with is a well-known ladies' man who was friendly with all the ladies in the company, most of whom were already in relationships with other men. He told me that his workplace was like a frat house, where young people are running through all the married women like it's a norm, and most of the guys are in competition to see who can hook up with more female coworkers. He added that what made my wife stand out was her interest in this guy and her lack of discretion, doing things like bringing him lunch, trying to hold his hand, and even flirting with him in public. I was shocked and confused. I couldn't believe my wife was doing all this while I was working hard for us. It dawned on me that perhaps the reason she always asked me to make 2 lunches was to feed this guy too. My work colleagues used to poke fun at me for packing my wife's lunch, but little did they know that I was also preparing a meal for her possible side piece. It's funny how things work out. The guy I just met told me not to panic or rat him out, because if my wife finds out that he spilled the beans, he might lose his job in a snap. He warned me that it's like a college frat party at their workplace, and if I go telling tales, people could easily gang up against him. As someone who's been in a gang, I know what he means. I couldn't thank him enough for shedding light on the situation. As I listened to my new acquaintance spill the beans about my wife's infidelity, I decided to keep the fact that she was pregnant to myself. I didn't want to complicate things further or risk him holding back more information if he found out. I signaled the bartender for more shots, but my new friend advised me to stop drinking as it might cloud my judgment. He understood the gravity of the situation and advised me to take some time to think things through. Sitting there, I couldn't stop staring at the guy my wife might be sleeping with. Every muscle in my body was tensed, and I had to resist the urge to walk over there and rip his head off. But my compatriot advised me not to drink too much, and I listened. I stayed silent and sober, taking the time to digest what I'd learned. He reassured me that he knew I needed space, and that he was going to join his friends. We exchanged numbers before he wandered off into the crowd. I couldn't shake the feeling that meeting my fellow Salvadoran at the party was no coincidence. It was a destiny that brought us together to reveal the truth about my wife's possible infidelity. It's moments like these that reaffirm my faith in God, because I don't believe in chance encounters. Throughout my life, from my humble beginnings to chasing in the American dream, there have always been people who guided me along the way. I trust that God won't put me in a situation I can't handle. I've been thought through tougher challenges than this, and I know I'll come out on top. When we finally arrived home that day, my mind was racing with thoughts about what my countrymen had told me. It was only made worse by the fact that during the gathering, my wife couldn't seem to take her eyes off the guy my countryman had mentioned. I couldn't help but wonder if my countryman was right, or if my mind was just playing tricks on me. On our way back home, my wife noticed that I was quieter than usual and asked me what was wrong. I told her that during the gathering she hadn't checked on me once, and it was as if I didn't even exist to her. As we drove home, I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that had settled in me after my countryman's bombshell. To add fuel to the fire, I noticed that my wife kept glancing in the direction of the guy he had mentioned. Maybe it was just my imagination, but it seemed like there was something going on between them. When she asked me why I was so quiet, I deflected, telling her that she hadn't checked on me all night. She apologized, saying that she had been caught up in conversations with her coworkers. She then asked me what my countrymen and I had talked about, and I told her that we discussed our home country. I couldn't bring myself to confront her about the accusation, not wanting to out my countrymen. I didn't want to accuse her directly, so I decided to bring it up in a roundabout way. I said, "Oh, by the way, I noticed that you were looking at one of your colleagues at work a lot. What's going on there?" She replied that he was just a work friend and they had to collaborate on various projects. But I knew that couldn't be true, because my countryman had told me they didn't work in the same department. She lied to my face. Plain and simple. Since that day, I began to have doubts about marrying my fiancé. Even though my countryman didn't confirm that the guy at her workplace was sleeping with her, his suspicion of their close relationship made me second-guess everything. I don't want to end the relationship just on suspicion alone. I need solid evidence before making any decisions. Despite the lack of concrete proof, I can't shake the feeling that my countryman was telling the truth. After all, what did he have to lose by telling me? I need to get to the bottom of this before taking any drastic action. I couldn't shake off the feeling that my countryman's suspicion about my wife's affair was true. Why would he risk his job to lie to me? I asked myself. It's not the kind of thing you just make up to another man. The next day, I decided to send a message to my wife by not making her lunch before I left for work. And for 3 days in a row, I stopped doing some of her chores. When she confronted me about it, I told her that my co-workers' wives make their lunches for them, and that she should be making mine too, not the other way around. Her response was infuriating. She angrily retorted that my coworkers' wives are slaves and that they are old school, and then she had the audacity to ask me if I see myself as a slave. I told her that I needed a wife who could fulfill traditional roles, including helping out around the house. That's when she got upset, took off the ring, and hurled it back at me. She claimed that she was doing me a favor by even considering marrying me. In response, I angrily told her to get lost and that I didn't need her for anything. She threatened to take me to court for child support and to have me deported. I knew I had to tread carefully, as I didn't want to end up in a nasty legal battle with her. That evening, she stormed out and didn't return home that night. I was concerned for her safety, but I was also worried about the potential fallout. Women tend to hold the upper hand in the family court system here, and if she decided to make accusations against me, I could be in deep trouble. Being an immigrant, even with legal status, made the situation even more precarious. Going back to El Salvador was not an option for me after all I had endured. I tried calling her repeatedly throughout the day, but she refused to answer. The next day, I confided in one of my trusted co-workers about the issues with my wife. He advised me to stop calling and chasing after her because he had a feeling she would return on her own. When I asked him how he knew, he told me that my wife was the one who wanted the marriage in the first place and that the desire to be together was growing within her and she couldn't resist it. He suggested that I should act like everything is normal and not beg her to come back, that I held all the cards in this situation. I wasn't too convinced about my coworker's advice, but I decided to give it a shot. When I got home from work, my wife was there, but she didn't say a single word to me. She passed me by in the kitchen, probably expecting me to start begging for her forgiveness, but I didn't. Instead, I chose to ignore her and slept on the couch while she took the bedroom. It was a bold move, but I had to do something to show her that I wasn't going to let her control the situation. As soon as I got up, I made my own lunch and skipped making hers. When I returned home from work, I saw her munching on some chips and watching TV without greeting me or even acknowledging my presence. I returned the favor and acted as if she was a ghost. While I was in the kitchen, she walked up to me and said, "So you're giving me the silent treatment now?" Without a word, I kept ignoring her and let her rant on about how my behavior might cause her to cancel the wedding. I couldn't help but think that she had already canceled the wedding in her mind. But as I glanced at her hand, I saw that she had put the ring back on. I kept my thoughts to myself because my silence seemed to be working well. She was visibly upset and thought I might leave her, but I felt like I was finally in control of the relationship. As I lay there sleeping on the couch, I was awoken in the middle of the night by my wife trying to cuddle up next to me, and for a moment I was weak and let her. She cuddled me until morning, and the next day I still didn't make her lunch. Ignoring her was proving to be difficult, but I managed to keep it up. When I got home that evening, she surprised me by making something for me to eat, the first time she had ever done that in our relationship. It wasn't the best meal I've ever had, but the effort she put in bewitched me. I couldn't help but break my silence and talk to her. She convinced me to join her in bed, and that night, for the first time in a while, she initiated closeness. I resumed making my own lunches again, but our relationship went back to normal. The wedding preparations resumed, and 2 months later, her father proudly walked her down the aisle. It was a small but beautiful ceremony. My wife looked stunning in her white gown, and a little baby bump showed off our little bundle of joy on the way. Everything seemed perfect, and I didn't want to ruin it by confronting her about my countryman's accusations. I had no evidence, and she would likely deny it. And what if my countryman was wrong? I didn't want to risk losing my wife and child, so I kept quiet about it. After we got married, my countryman learned about it through the grapevine. I didn't keep in touch with him, but he found out anyway. Perhaps he assumed that I didn't believe him and chose to stay silent to protect himself. If I had broken off the engagement, he would have provided me with more evidence to support his claim. The baby shower was over, and everyone was excited for me. I told my co-workers and my parents that I was expecting a baby boy. To be home with my wife more, I worked fewer hours and took care of her in every way possible. I gave her foot massages, pampered her, and did everything I could to make her happy. As the baby was about to be delivered, I waited outside the operating room alongside her family. The delivery was successful, and the baby was brought out to meet us. Initially, I felt overjoyed to finally see my child, but as I looked at the baby's face, I couldn't help but notice that the baby seemed too light-skinned. I scrutinized the baby's features and came to the realization that the baby was mixed with Hispanic and white, making me suspect that the child wasn't mine, but rather the product of my wife's relationship with her coworker. I scrutinized everyone's expression, but they seemed oblivious to what I was feeling. Was I just overthinking things? Maybe my countryman's words were getting to me. A nurse tried to lighten the mood by jokingly asking if I was scared of being a father, and my wife and everyone else laughed along. But I couldn't shake off the nagging feeling that something was off. In the end, I signed the birth certificate and played my part as a father. I even took a picture of the baby and sent it to my trusted co-workers, including my countryman, asking them to confirm what I saw. After my countryman's claim and my co-worker's confirmation, I couldn't shake off the suspicion that my newborn baby was not mine. Following my countryman's advice, I bought a DNA paternity test kit at Walgreens before bringing the baby home. I used the painless cheek swabs on me and the baby during my week off work to help my wife take care of the baby. I sent in the samples with a $140 lab fee and anxiously waited for the results, which were due in 2 days. I was careful not to alert my wife about the test, as the consequences of her intercepting the mail and finding out the truth would be a nightmare. 2 days passed, and I anxiously checked the mail every hour, but the results didn't arrive until the 4th day. During those 4 days, I spent most of my time with my wife and the baby, bonding with him and hoping that he was really mine. But when I finally opened the envelope, the truth was revealed. The baby was not mine. I couldn't believe it, and I had to go to the bathroom to cry and compose myself before confronting my unfaithful wife. I had worked too hard to raise someone else's child, and if the test had come back positive, our marriage would have been over. The marriage I worked so hard for, all the sweat and tears, it was all for nothing. The time invested was wasted, and now an innocent child is caught in the middle of this mess. My wife once told me during one of our fights that I was lucky to be with her, but now I realize that she was using me all along. On the day I received the DNA test result, my wife was at home getting ready to go out with a friend. I emerged from the bathroom with the envelope in my hand and called her back to face the music. As she read the results, her face turned red, and I could sense her confusion at my saddened expression. She demanded to know what it was, but I simply replied that she knew exactly what it was. She couldn't believe that I had gone behind her back to get a DNA test on our son without notifying her. It was as if she was more concerned about the fact that I had the test done without her knowledge than the fact that our son wasn't biologically mine. I was taken aback by her attempt to shift the blame onto me. I told her that her days of deceit were over and that I'd reached my limit with our marriage. She insisted that the test results were fake and that I was the true father, claiming that she had only been with me for the past year. I reminded her that DNA doesn't lie and that I was finished with her lies and betrayal. I declared that I was leaving that very night and that she should find the real father to look after her baby. She became furious and accused me of being a coward for abandoning an innocent child. She claimed that I was the father, citing my signature on the birth certificate. I didn't care what she had to say. I told her that she could come after me if she wanted to, but I didn't want to hear any more lies from her. The only truth she had ever told me was her name. As tears streamed down her face, she begged me not to leave her alone to raise the baby. She tried to tell me that the baby was mine, but I didn't believe her. I reminded her that she had cheated on me with one of her co-workers and that she should have thought about the consequences of her actions before betraying me. She went quiet for a moment before denying that she had been unfaithful to me. But I knew the truth, and I wasn't going to stick around to hear any more of her lies. That night, I rented an Airbnb, packed my clothes, and left the house. I didn't want anything else from her, not even the furniture. Update. I booked an Airbnb for $25 that night, but I couldn't sleep at all. I was a complete mess, sobbing all night long, feeling lonely and defeated. All the time and effort I had invested in the relationship had led to nothing. Honestly, I should have ended things long ago when my countryman first mentioned his suspicions. I texted the DNA results to my coworker, and he wasn't surprised at all. I needed to talk to someone, so I called him, and he did his best to cheer me up. I was grateful for his efforts. He then asked where I was staying, and I told him I had rented an Airbnb. He offered for me to stay at his place with his wife and kids for a week, until I found a permanent place, but warned me that there wasn't much space. I accepted his offer anyway. I didn't hear from my wife after I left the house, but 3 days later, she called me, claiming that the DNA result was fake and wouldn't be accepted in court without a court-sanctioned DNA test. She also accused me of getting cold feet and signing the birth certificate because I knew that I was the father. She threatened to sue me for pain and suffering and abandoning my responsibility. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but her words instilled some doubt in me. What if she was right? What if I was the father after all? Later that same evening, my countryman gave me a call and asked me about the DNA result. I told him that it showed that I was not the father. He then revealed that he had been invited by my wife's affair partner to a bar that evening, and he was concerned about what had just transpired. Apparently, my wife had called him claiming that the baby was his, and she told her affair partner that I already knew, but she didn't know how. The affair partner admitted to my countryman that he wanted nothing to do with the baby, but he was afraid that my wife might use the baby to coerce him into a relationship. The plot thickens, I thought to myself. I replied to my countryman that the affair partner got what was coming to him. His days of playing the field were done. While speaking with the affair partner, my countryman skillfully probed for more information, framing his questions in a way that coaxed out more details. The affair partner confessed that the relationship had started about 1.5 years ago, around 4 months before I met my wife at the park. He said that the affair partner had been eyeing my wife at work for a while, trying to come up with an excuse to talk to her. Since she wasn't in his department, he couldn't think of a reason to approach her until the company held an employee gathering at a bar, which was a regular occurrence. He bought her a drink, and from there, it was game on. They went home together that night, but he bailed on her. I couldn't help but wonder how this guy managed to get my wife in bed on the same day he met her, while it took me months to even get close to her, even though I had good intentions. He went on to reveal that they continued their affair frequently until a month after my wife and I met. She started pushing him for commitment, but at that time he had 4 other girls on rotation and had no interest in settling down with her, so he turned her down. Apparently, my wife then tried to make him jealous by getting a loser boyfriend, that is me, to show off to him. But when that didn't work, she started bringing him homemade lunch every day as an excuse to visit his office, and even dressed provocatively at work to get his attention. My wayward wife had no shame. After getting engaged to me, she paraded around her affair partner's workplace, flaunting her ring and trying to show off how desirable she was. But instead of deterring the affair partner, it only made him more interested in hooking up with her. He figured that since I had already vouched for her by proposing, he could have his cake and eat it too, without having to commit to her. It was a sickening situation, and I couldn't believe I had been so blind to it all. On the same day she showed off her engagement ring, he had unprotected contact with her, and she let him. From then on, they were having close contact frequently, even the day after the gathering that I was present at. My countryman also told me that he was sure they were having an affair when he tried to convince me not to marry her, but didn't have any concrete evidence at the time. However, a few weeks later, it became very obvious, and there was even a time when the affair partner accidentally admitted it to him while bragging. At the end of the day, it was all just a bluff. My wife never cared about our marriage. She just wanted to make her affair partner jealous. But her plan blew up in her face. And then, after it backfired, she didn't care about me. She just wanted someone to be there so she wouldn't be a single mom. And she was also afraid of what her family and friends would think of her. After my conversation with my countryman, a surge of anger coursed through me. I couldn't believe how my wife had manipulated and used me like I was nothing. I'm usually a well-mannered person, but I felt like she deserved to face the consequences for what she'd done to me. Despite this, I just wanted to get the divorce over with so that I could move on with my life. So I scraped together whatever little money I had and hired a divorce lawyer. I also employed the services of a process server to deliver the message to my soon-to-be ex-wife. Once my wayward wife was served with the divorce papers, she contacted me and became irate that I had gone through with it. She warned me that she would make it as difficult as possible for me. We ended up having a shouting match on the phone. But when I revealed to her the name of the real father and some of the details that my countryman had told me, she went silent. I could tell that she was taken aback by how much information I had gathered. I couldn't resist feeling smug as I hung up the phone on my wayward wife. I imagined her mind racing, trying to figure out how I had outsmarted her. But as much as I relished in that moment, I knew I still had a battle ahead. I wanted to make her pay for all the pain she had caused me, but I didn't want to do anything illegal. So I came up with a plan to hurt her reputation and make her want to give me an uncontested divorce. It had to be something big, something that would make people see her for who she really is. With copies of the DNA results in hand, I was ready to expose my wayward wife's infidelity to the world. I wanted to write a scathing letter detailing her affair with her affair partner and mail it to her parents, as well as all her friends and family members on Facebook. But I knew I had to be cautious, as there were certain details that only my countryman knew, and I didn't want to inadvertently out him too. So I took a more measured approach and simply stated in the message that I had conducted a DNA test and the baby was not mine. I also mentioned that the baby looked like a mixture of white and Hispanic, which had raised my suspicion. Lastly, I explained that my wayward wife was refusing to give me an amicable divorce and was promising to make things difficult for me. I sent the message to her parents and her friends on Facebook, hoping that this would be enough to hurt her reputation and convince her to agree to an uncontested divorce. I couldn't stop grinning like a Cheshire cat as I watched my phone light up with notifications from my wife's family and friends. I knew I shouldn't have taken pleasure in their misery, but after everything my wife had put me through, it felt like sweet revenge. I turned off my phone to avoid any confrontation and waited for the storm to pass. It didn't take long for my wayward wife to grant me an amicable divorce. She didn't hire a lawyer or show up in court, probably because she was too busy putting out fires from her family and friends. I was the least of her problems now, and I couldn't be more relieved. I moved out of my coworker's house and rented a small, affordable apartment in the inner city. It wasn't much, but it served its purpose. I was barely home most of the time anyway, so I only needed a place to rest my head and take a shower. I had to do the hardest thing and call my family back home and lie to them, telling them that my wife had a termination and that we were ending our marriage. It was a tough pill to swallow, but I couldn't bear the thought of them finding out about the whole affair fiasco. As I was trying to move on with my life, I spoke to my countryman, who gave me some great advice about a government assistance program that provides grants for people to go to school. I never knew about this program before, or else I would have taken advantage of it a long time ago. After enrolling in a construction management program at a community college, I am 1 year in and already thinking about transferring to a university after I complete my 2-year degree. I work during the day and go to school at night, taking 2 classes every semester. It's tough, but I'm determined to make a better life for myself.